Welcome to the method. In this episode, we talk with Hilary Steel. She's a funeral celebrant who believes that grieving doesn't have to be all doom and gloom.
The method, we're eating, we're sleeping, we're fight. The method, for a marriage or divorce or one night. Well, I know you probably think that it sounds pretty dumb, but the methods you use to get shit done. If you're chatting up a lover, you're going on a run, then it might be wise to heed the words of a pro with a little bit of help. Who knows, to get some happiness out of your woes, to get promoted, CEO of a happy mind inside your head. You don't want to wake up dead, thinking why'd you work so hard for things that hardly work for you.
Okay, so hey Hilary, how's it going today?
Hello there.
There's quite a long list of achievements and experiences, so why don't you give us a sort of timeline slash rundown of your life so far and how you've got to where you are today?
Okay, this is going to sound strange. Right, so graduated university languages.
Okay.
Worked in corporate world, Bank of America, Goldman Sachs, ABN AMRO, and Hewlett-Packard. Lived in Holland for 4.5 years, set up a laser hair removal business.
Okay.
Moved back to the UK after 4.5 years and set up an aesthetic clinic here in the UK. I still own part share of a clinic that's still running and has been for about 15 years. I launched a business magazine and some business awards, and they're still running. They've been running 8 or 9 years now. I sold the magazine but kept the awards. I do a lot of public speaking. I go on BBC Radio Kent once a month with Lembit Opik, my radio husband, and I heckle him. And then something happened in my own life that changed what I wanted to do with some of the skills I had. So I now actually deliver funeral ceremonies. So I'm the storyteller for people's final journey.
Right. It's quite an eclectic mix of different things. And it's hard to draw a line between each of them that would sort of have, shareable skill sets in a way. But obviously you're good at making businesses work.
I think a lot of the skill sets are organisation. A lot of my roles involve public speaking because I'm on stage a lot with the awards as well. Yeah. So it's having those kind of skills and honing them, and the languages have really helped. But I didn't want to stay in corporate. I knew that very early on that I needed to work for myself. So it's like when you're in a job, I guess 18 months, 2 years, you think about a career change or a step up the ladder or something, I guess. I don't know. It's not really my world. But for me, opportunities presented themselves and I would weigh them up. Yes, actually, I want to do this now. So I would learn the skills or adapt or influence my skills to be able to do it successfully, I suppose.
Yeah, definitely. And I don't know, I guess just a level of empathy as well, working with people in many different ways. You've got to have such a variety of empathies.
Yeah. My role now is, I'm going to be honest with you, is the best thing I have ever done.
Yeah.
You're meeting people when they're at their most vulnerable. They are in limbo land. They don't really know what they're feeling. They're trying to organise things. And I just go in there and scoop them up and make the actual process of the funeral that much easier for them. Take all that strain away, create something. I'm very creative in the way I write, and create something that reflects the person, that they walk out of the ceremony going, that was lovely. That he would have liked that, she would have appreciated that. And that's kind of it. And it's it's a non-public gratification. So yes, I've got lots of testimonials, but the best testimonial is when I leave the chapel or by the burial ground and the family look at me in a certain way. And it's just for that instant, they love you. And that's it. That's what actually motivates me now. It's one of the most beautiful feelings.
So you have this business award ceremony that you have set up. And then you also you read poems at people's funerals. They're kind of like such vastly different sides of the same coin. One is an award ceremony that is there to represent people who are at their highest achievement and to almost be empathetic with people who have achieved so much. And the other is you being empathetic with people who have lost so much. And both of them are things that you've created from nothing that didn't need to necessarily be there in the first place, but provide both people with a milestone to put into their life.
Fabulous way of describing it. I think my mum always said to me that if Hilary had a job where she could speak, she would be happy. And I wanted to retrain as a civil celebrant a long time ago, and I thought it would be to do weddings. I thought, the jolly side, the stand-up comedy side of that kind of energy would be suited to weddings. And about 2 years ago, I thought, actually, no, funerals, but I didn't know if I could do it. And then my mum passed away, and I cared for her at home for 8.5 years. She was paralysed from a stroke. In this very room, actually, I turned their bedroom round very quickly. And in between my dad died 3 months later. He waited for his wife, love of his life, and then he went. And in between, I went to retrain. I decided I'm going to do it. So my dad knew I was doing it. And then I told him one morning when I visited him in hospital, but I got them both at home. And my dad said, I went to him in the morning and I said, I won't be able to speak to you all day. The phone will be off. I'm actually going to watch for funerals to see if I could, basically stomach it, because until you do it, you don't know. And then I got back to the hospital in the afternoon, and he was in one of those awful wards where people unfortunately were elderly and passing away. And I walked in and he said, hello, darling, how did it go with the funeral director? People must have looked at me as if I was the demon child, organising his funeral. And so I arranged to do this. And then a funeral director who I met through one of my award ceremonies gave me the first family to look after. And I ended up delivering my first service just 4 days after my dad died.
Right.
So it was, and the day after he died, I was actually on a family visit that had already been arranged. So, but I walked in there and everything just went, yes, this is different. This is something I've never experienced this feeling before. So yeah, so there is a logical reason why I transitioned into it. And I think that's why I understand quite a lot where the families are at. I can't understand what they're feeling because everyone's unique and grief is unique. But what I can do is, for that 2 or 3 weeks that they're in my world, is add a little bit of, je ne sais quoi, a little bit of something that just helps them along and allows them to start grieving, I guess.
And one of the questions I was going to ask was, does it ever sort of get difficult for you emotionally when you're doing, 2, 3, 4 funerals a week and you're hearing all these stories from these families and having to sort of put it into your own words? I can imagine it can become quite a load to bear.
I think to be successful at it, you have to be able to detach yourself without losing the empathy. And I think that's one of the key skills that I maybe have developed. However, I had to, under COVID, we were doing Zoom calls or similar for family visits. So we'd have different family members. And the one that really sticks with me was a lady who had opted to take her own life. And then her sons were organising the funeral. And I clicked log off after that, and I had to step away. And that got me. Because what can you say? There's nothing anyone can say to make them feel better. All I could do, which I did, was to get them talking about their mum, the good things about their mum, the fun memories, the telling off when they were children, this kind of thing, just to give them a little bit of an energy boost, I guess.
So just to clear up for people who may not fully understand what you do, sort of in the most simplest terms, describe what you do and maybe a small amount of process that is universal for every project that you do.
It's with the funerals, you agree to accept the funeral, so you're contacting the family. And that's always the worst part, because words, I'm sorry for your loss, please accept my condolences, they sound very empty. Mm-hmm. And I try to say something unique or different. But yes, then there's the whole process. We have certain rituals that we have to go through. So we have to follow certain procedures. And there's a lot of timeline stuff, chronological stuff that we have to go through, both within the story of the person and also within the organising of the funeral. And that's the detail. That's the actual detail that is stringent from crematoria to crematorium. Then the fun bit starts, because you have this whole bit that you can do what you want. If someone wants to come into some crazy music, they can come into some crazy music. You can really capture them. I delivered a ceremony last week where the middle music, the reflection music, was Victoria Wood, the ballad of Barry and Frida.
He said, I can't do it, I don't believe in too much sex. This fashion for passion turns us into nervous wrecks.
Yeah, talk about just reflect the person. And the son, when he was organising it for his mum, he didn't realise that he really could do it for her. He thought you had to do the benediction, you had to do this, you had to have the religious side of this, and he just didn't know. So being able to adopt that creativity into a structured process makes the tediousness of that structured process a lot more bearable.
Yeah, I love that. Something, I mean, it's quite morbid, but I've already told my mum that I want Funky Town playing at my funeral. I just think it's one of those things that, like you say, it's probably been built up to be something that you have to have it this way, and it has to be quite religious, and everyone has to wear black. And I feel like a lot of people miss out on an experience that they could have if they weren't, falling into that pattern. So I think it's great that you sort of encourage that with the people that you work with.
It's a nice thing. I mean, yesterday I delivered 2 ceremonies, and the second one I'd written a poem for the lady, for her husband, who was in his 70s. And I wrote it the night before, and I rang her and said, would I be allowed to read this? I've just been thinking about you. Can I read it? And so then I hand wrote it for her on a scroll yesterday in italic pen. And then at the end of the ceremony, when I leave, there's a process again that I meet the funeral director, we bow to the coffin, I leave, and then he returns to the family. It's almost like he passes the family to my care, I take them and then pass them back to him. It's part of that traditional side, which I do like. And I gave her the scroll, which was a lovely thing to do. And this is the first time I'm actually taking my little dog, who's behind me. I'm taking my dog around to see her because she just lost her dog as well as her husband, who was also Yorkie. And so I'm actually going to go and see her next week, just to, basically it'll be a saying goodbye kind of thing, but I don't normally do that. So we have options of I am flexible, and things do pop up that I adapt when it happens, sort of thing.
How sort of common is your role? Like, it doesn't seem like it's something that is like an option at every funeral director's. Is it quite a rare thing what you do? No,
it's become more and more common since about the 90s, where people, if you have a humanist ceremony, there is absolutely no religious content, where as a civil celebrant, if a family would like the Lord's Prayer, I will happily lead the Lord's Prayer for them, because it's words from the book. Whether what my own beliefs are irrelevant in that time, because I've opted to be their storyteller. That's a choice I've made. But most funeral directors now will offer celebrant-led funerals.
All right. I mean, there's no reason why I would know a lot about a funeral director. It's something that I assumed. Yeah, well,
assumed wrong.
Assumed wrongly. Yeah.
I'm interested. So I assume you consider what you do as a sort of art form, and when you're writing poems for these funerals, and then you're writing them out on calligraphy, I guess, and giving them to people as a memento, as a work of art, you kind of have to force yourself to come to terms with your art having a final point. Like, I'm an artist, I'm a musician, I'm a composer, and there's a lot of redrafting, and even after the performance, there's still opportunities to work on the music to improve it. But for you, you've got to make it final, and not only is it final, but it's going to coincide with someone else's final hurrah in the world. And so how do you become so sure of the artwork and give it to somebody and just know that that's it?
I think, as you as an artist will appreciate, that for example, a photographer would capture a moment at that precise time in a photograph. An experienced photographer will have adapted the light, will have captured everything, the exposure, the aperture, everything will be done. And that picture, it might take him 500 pictures to get that one, but he's learned the process to do that. And I think a lot of my previous experience in my work life, such as deadlines, corporate deadlines when I worked in the global financing sector, I think that kind of knowledge that you have got until then to do it. And also I wing it. I'm quite a winger, that I can adapt to a situation really quickly and see where it leads. So, like, I only wrote that poem the night before because it just came to me like taking a snapshot, and it captured his love of gardening. It's a very simple 10 lines, I think, capturing a love of gardening. And I think if you're confident in your own ability in anything you do, you go with it. And things don't have to be perfect. Things just have, people will always remember in a funeral how you make them feel, not necessarily what you said. when you gift something like the poem, you already know in your heart that it's right. It's captured that precise moment, that in 2 weeks' time, other influences will have been in my life that will have diluted what I remember about that gentleman. So it's not something I could work on. However, I could take that poem and adapt it and expand it and tidy it up for someone else.
Right. So it's like you're very much in the moment.
Living the now.
Almost, I don't know if it's a crass thing to say, but almost like, what's the word? You're like receiving the information and putting it onto the paper in some sort of like godly way.
Oh, I don't think my friends would consider godly anything to do with it. But no, you're right. There is. It is something that happens, and it's just something I'm very drawn to. And I think once I get an idea, I mean, where is it? Here, I have this. This is my new notebook.
Okay.
So I always carry around a notebook. I have to write in ink. I have to write in an ink pen. If I don't have this pen, I can't write in this book. So I've got these OCDs about how I write. I suppose an artist wouldn't use that paintbrush on that canvas. You know, it's a very similar sort of thing, I believe. I can't say I'm not a drawer or anything, but I think it's like I said, once you trust your processes and once you trust your heartbeat, I think that you can pour that into anything that you set your mind to.
Yeah.
Were you able to, while you were working in banking, did you have kind of this longing to use your passion for writing and creativity while you were working there?
Yes, I kept journals, and I can see if I flick back through just how much it was destroying me as a character. And I totally understand that I had to go through that to understand, to move on. I mean, I'm nearly 50. I've had time to do all this. It's not that I've done things just for 1 year, 2 years, and then gone on. I have spent time developing and constantly learning myself. And I'm very into meditation. And I think that helps because being able to clear your mind in anything, and also my role now, really helps because then it's a blank canvas for everything that you do. And that's a real skill. My brain used to be so busy. And when I learned to really switch off and I can actually think about nothing, that's cool. That's pretty cool. Not bad for a 50-year-old bird.
I think that's something we all aspire to. I kind of go through phases of meditating and not meditating, but when I do, there's always such a big difference.
Mm.
Yeah, that's true. Actually, I'm not in a phase of meditating at the moment or doing any. I'm kind of out of it for maybe a month and a bit, and you just saying that now has made me realize it makes you very present when you can switch off like that for maybe like 10 minutes a day, or just 5 minutes a day, just to reconnect with yourself. It can really increase how present you are in the moment. And in turn, it makes your days feel longer, and it means that you can get a lot more done in terms of how you get a lot more emotionally done.
No, I agree. And I think what I've done over the last probably 10 years of my life is increased my own emotional intelligence, my EQ, that I'm much more aware. And I think the awareness that I've developed over being a carer for my parents full time for all those years, that awareness that I've learned through them and what's happened helps me be more empathetic in person to the people I'm dealing with now. I think it's something positive that I have taken from. I mean, my parents' passing was sad. It wasn't a tragedy. They were poorly. Mum was paralysed. It was going to happen. It wasn't tragic. It was just very, very sad and very close together. And I think that understanding a lot of things like that and taking that with me to, in my rucksack of emotions and stuff to families, I can draw on experiences that I've had and not tell them about them necessarily, but while I'm thinking about it and project that onto them, that love, that kind of thing that I try and do. And I think that's come a lot from meditating and understanding the now.
I think it seems like it's one of those situations where I'm talking about death, but if you sort of shy away from it, the longer it will take for you to accept it. Whereas if you're more aware and you kind of lean into the emotions that you're feeling and you try to process them rather than like block them and keep them in, then that seems like it would be the better way to deal with it. And I think meditation will become really helpful in a situation like that if you're listening to yourself, being the observer, and really like sort of being aware of how you're feeling, as opposed to kind of burying it or masking it.
When I meet people in that situation, they don't understand what they're feeling, and it's all mixed and it's all heightened. And it's very difficult. It'd be lovely if you could just say, why don't we meditate together? But of course, then they're not going to be open to that. So I've kind of found this way of saying to them, what I'm trying to get them to do is to switch off and just relax and think about something else other than the horrible side. That's step one, is why don't we just take a few moments and you tell me the funniest thing you can remember about him? And that starts a process where their brain, it does calm down, and then they laugh. I finished a ceremony 2 weeks ago where the gentleman, the father-in-law said, you have made this an absolutely enjoyable process. He said, I can't believe I'm saying that. I appreciated the honesty. And what a compliment is that it was going to happen. You were going to have a funeral ceremony, but at least to have enjoyed the whole process and remembered things about the deceased that you maybe had forgotten, and then taken that time to reflect on them. It's pretty cool.
Yeah, I mean, it must be. I don't have much experience in this area in terms of losing, family members and stuff, but it must be so easy to go into this process like feeling just 100% negative. And
Very.
I couldn't imagine walking into a funeral director's, and there must be 1 in a million in terms of people who walk in there with a smile on their face or walk in there with some sort of positive attitude. So being able to change that, flip it around like you do is, I'm sure, very, very, I'm sure they appreciate it very much.
I think you're right. And also, a lot of my friends that don't know that I'm necessarily doing this, because it's not something I'm shouting about. But if you look to my Facebook profile, it says I'm a celebrant. If you look at my Twitter, Instagram, it does say it. There is a hint there, but it's not something I'm shouting out about. Now, I'll be honest with you. What are we now? July the 18th. I only went into palliative care with my mum on the 1st of August last year. And so my first ceremony that I delivered was only in November. And unlike most people, when they come into this and they want to be a celebrant, it's quite difficult to get into because you have to build rapport or be recommended by families. But having built a network and been given my chance, I've delivered in the region of about 50 ceremonies now. And thing is, though, when I come home, they have a process that they go into a folder, and me and my other half, we always say good night to each one. We put each one to bed separately. If I've done 2 in a day, it doesn't happen at the same time. There's a gap. They never stay in the same folder. They never go into a chapel twice. There's all these little rituals that I have that keep me with my OCD process like that, but also it's complete respect. So it's never a Thursday at 12 o'clock. It's David or it's Anne. It's always the person. And my other half, we talk about every single person that I do. I tell funny stories about them, what the family have told me. So I really try and get to know them. And then having my release at home, we've got this routine. When I then put them to bed, that's it. That's Mary done. And it's not cold. It's now Anne needs my attention. And it is like dividing your attention to where it's needed at that time.
So a lot of the way you do this, is this something that you've just sort of learned with experience, or is it something that you've like sort of trained a lot for and researched for?
A lot of research, and I did join a training organisation, but it's like funeral director. It's an unregulated industry, as in it's self-regulated. So although you don't need to have a qualification, I did go through the United Kingdom Society of Celebrants. However, I haven't yet completed it because instead of doing writing theoretical services for pretend families as part of the training one-to-one online with a mentor, I've been doing real families. So I will intend to complete it by the end of the year, but that actually doesn't make any difference to me as a practicing celebrant.
There's nothing better than the real thing. In theory, it's always slightly different, isn't it? You can't. I would imagine that you wouldn't be able to get the sort of same emotions from talking to a computer or reading a page full of fake information as opposed to actually being with a family. No,
exactly. And I have been fortunate to have I've gained so much experience so quickly, from burials to cremations to natural burial grounds. I very much do one here in Kent. and they're just opening another one. And I'm looking at, with some friends of mine and associates, opening our own natural burial ground down south near where I live. And that way, it's just stunning that trees are planted, and I'm learning lots about the nature around and what would be allowed to grow and how to make the land that it would be change of use. So I'll do the grown-up stuff with the planning and change of use, but also then starting to understand a different aspect of nature that I've never been exposed to. You know, the nearest I've just bought a camper van before lockdown, and I've been away in it once. I'm going away in it this afternoon. And it's just like seeing different things and leading different lives. It was 5-star hotels. Now, you know, put me in a muddy field with a camper van, my other half and my dog, and I am so happy as long as I've got a pen and paper. I don't care about phone signal, pen and paper. Right, this weekend. It's funny how life changes, actually. It's just got me, you think Goldman Sachs to walking around in a pair of wellies, and yeah, I like that.
Exactly what I was just thinking. I was just thinking, like, it seems like you've lived like several different lives so far, and it's quite
it's been fun. Hard work. I have to say though, but you've got to remember as well that I was very tied for 8.5 years with my parents. I don't have kids. And when you're tied like that, you go away for a weekend, you'd have to strategically plan for carers to come, everything. So it was never just being able to spontaneously go away. And now I have a freedom that I haven't had since I was probably at university. So I'm probably like a little kid in a candy store. You know, go, yay, let's go play. Oh, look, I got mud on my hands. Oh, well, let's make a pie. You know, it's a different freedom that's coming. It's not a midlife crisis or anything. It's just, it's a freedom, I guess.
So, yeah, I'm interested in this. So you looked after your parents that were unwell and sort of on their way out for, did you say 8 years? And I can imagine that a lot of people who have to look after their parents in their dying days would be hoping that there's these intimate moments where they're going to sit down and connect with their parents on a level that they've never connected with before, and it's going to be some sort of Hollywood revelations are going to happen. And I can imagine that for most people, that's never, that they might hope that's going to happen, and they're going to be disappointed to find out that they're still going to have the typical disconnect that you have with your parents, which is they're your parents and you're the child, and you'll never truly know them as well as you want to. And I wonder, as you had to do that with both parents at the same time, and as you're someone who's so empathetic, do you have any advice on that? Did you have any of those connecting moments, and did you maybe hope to have more?
I did have connecting moments, and we talked about stuff that kids would normally talk about with their parents. I knew so much about my dad when he was at sea. A few of the conversations I did have to go, la, 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 la. My dad was 88 when he passed. He'd led an interesting and full life. My mum was an amazing lady, very strong. I'm surprised she tolerated being paralysed without being stroppy, because she was very active. But she was an amazing strength character, and I hope if I've got 10% of that strength, then, you know, I know I've got more than that, because I have 3 older brothers, and my next brother up, he turned around to me one day a couple of years ago and he said, "Oh, goodness sake, you're turning into your mother." I went, "Oh, thank you. It's the nicest thing you've ever said to me." But I was very lucky to have them. But, you know, they were living in my home. So my home was invaded by carers, 2 carers 4 times a day. There was lots of positives. I was the one doing all the medicines, the doctors, all this. I used to joke that my name was Hilary, can you just Steel? You know, I'd be out and my phone would ring and I'd see it was home, and I'd be like, oh, what's wrong? What's happened? So there were times when I wasn't empathetic and it wasn't a Hollywood moment, and I did snap. And even towards the end, I said, just don't do the moany groany stuff. I can't do all that wailing and, you know, pain stuff. And I wasn't very good at that. I'm not very good with the hygiene side of looking after someone. That was definitely way beyond my remit. And I knew my boundaries and I knew my limits. And I think I got very tired at times, and the 3 months in between mum and dad was hell for me. It was 24/7 hell, pretty much. Dad went into hospital for a few days, and I was like, it was like respite. And so yes, it's not all Hollywood and lovely, and I'm not an angel of sorts. You know, I'm probably one of the last people I would have thought would have embraced this role or done it. But at what point, when you're looking after them, do you say, "Do you know, I've had enough now, I'm going to put you in a home," when you've made a promise that you wouldn't? But people don't have that with me. They might have their parents in a home or in their own home or a hospice in their dying days and look at doing things with them that way and their revelations. But I think as long as you feel that you've done enough and you've said what you want, I suppose there's nothing really more you can do because you can't turn back time.
Well, yeah, not too long ago, my granddad died, and the year before he died, or the summer before he died, he was struggling to walk, and I was at home, so I would take him on a walk every day to just the pond in the village and back, and I started to get a bit bored of that, so I'd take him in the car on an errand I had to do, or maybe I'd take him to see one of my friends. If I wanted to go see one of my friends, we'd do a little bit of walking because he couldn't walk very far. So, we really got to know each other over that time. And then as he got more unwell and he started to lose his sense of self a little bit more, I started to speak to him, ask him questions about his life because that's much easier for him to talk about. And he'd tell me about him being at sea and being in the Navy, and told me that his favourite place he'd ever been was Tromsø in Norway. And then he went into hospital, and it was he went in and out of hospital a few times, but it was obvious that this wasn't something he was going to recover from at all, really. And me and my mum decided to book a trip from Tromsø in Norway and get the boat down the coast and through the fjords and then come back. And between the time of when we booked the trip and we went, he actually died. So then he died, and then me and my mum went to Tromsø on this trip to visit his favourite place ever, and then we came back and had the funeral. And for my mum, this was great because all of the difficult stuff of booking the funeral and stuff like that she didn't have to do because she was on this holiday, and that her brothers had to do, even though maybe they wouldn't have helped out so much or other family members helped out a bit more. And then I think for her, that was probably quite a lot of closure to see these places together and with me and have a nice holiday. And then we came back and had the funeral, and they're definitely, I feel happy that I managed to have those moments, and then we managed to have that holiday. And I know when it came to the funeral, I'm quite a stoic person anyway, but when it came to the funeral, it was very easy to accept everything because we had this long process that wasn't difficult, but it was just a process of thinking about the man in different ways rather than only thinking about how he died.
And that's lovely because you've got all those memories. So you've thought about your granddad today, and those memories have come flooding back into your mind, and you've reflected on them, and you've smiled a few times. So that's how you will always remember your granddad, will be always the happiness of those moments. And that's what I try and help people do, in a way that it's okay to laugh, it's okay to want to shut the door, it's okay to cry, and it's okay to do whatever's needed. But you've got those wonderful memories that are yours to call upon whenever you need them, and they're yours, and they can never be taken away from you.
Yeah, and I don't necessarily think it's just the thing that I like isn't just the happy memories that I remember of him, if they are, but they're also the happy memories I remember of myself. Just, I didn't have to force any of these things. I just did something really nice, which was take him out for a walk because I enjoyed it. And I think, oh, that was a nice thing that I did. I mean, maybe that's a bit self-obsessed, but I get to think of how he maybe brought out a good side of me. And also that holiday that me and my mum went on, it was a nice thing for us both to do. And that we did it because of him, and all these sort of pleasant memories are grouped together at the end, and they go together with the end of his life.
But that's it, isn't it? That's lovely. I mean, that is really lovely. And you've got lessons from your granddad.
Yeah, for sure.
It's a win-win, lovely.
He was a good man as well. He was a very, very sweet man.
You see, if he could hear how you were talking about him now, he would probably be bursting with pride.
Yeah.
Because if that's how he's being remembered, and look at your eyes smiling away there, Mr. Stoic Man. He's brought that out of you, and I think that's a priceless gift.
Mm. And I know my mum will be listening to this when it comes out, and she'll probably be tearing up, or she'll be very emotional about this, I'm sure.
Oh, bless her. Hi, Mum.
One thing, I guess I wanted to ask a little bit more about the natural burials. So you're getting into natural burials. I know that funerals, or not necessarily funerals, but burying people is actually quite an environmental problem with all the coffins and all the different things that are buried with people, and it can be a bit of a problem. So natural burials, is that a solution?
Cremation actually is also very environmentally unfriendly, and there is an option that's currently being tested, launched, whatever, in the States, of course, and it's using a water-based solution, so it's less carbon imprint and stuff. However, the natural burials, there are stipulations, so you don't have headstones. It's just marked with an electronic chip. The land has to be grown. It cannot then be converted to anything else. So there has to be protection on the land and the right sort of deciduous trees, plants, etc. for the area. You have to fell really trees that aren't supposed to be there, for the soil, etc. There's a lot of work preparing the land. But the caskets are biodegradable. And the attire, shall we say, that the deceased is placed in is also biodegradable. What's going to happen in municipal burial grounds in the future is the average time that a grave is tended in a municipal land is 5.5 years, roughly. And then it goes to it's neglected. But there's graves that what they speak about doing is, don't quote me on this, but they'll open the bottom of the graves, drop what's ever there, and then build again. So you'll be leasing a grave in a municipal place for maybe 15 years. I think Holland 35 years, and I think they've reduced it down. I don't know the exact terms, but with the natural burial grounds, you will always be there. As you have to be careful, you can't be near a water source. There's very strict regulations on where you can place this, but you could be buried on your own land if you wanted to. You could actually have a home burial. Scattering of ashes is an environmental issue. And if you scattered someone's ashes at Beachy Head, for example, you'd be fined £1,000 for littering.
Oh, really?
Yeah. It's actually illegal to do it. So you have to check that that you can. And there's lots of things to think about, because all the stuff there that's in that pot is still, going to be environmentally damaging, but there are ways to do it. So at a crematorium, when they have scattering places, that soil is then turned over roughly every month.
Right.
So there's ways to do it to be environmental, but the natural burial grounds, well, you can't be, for example, you're not cremated in shoes. You can't wear shoes. In a natural burial, you are basically in a shroud type gown. For municipal burials, you can be buried in shoes and things can be placed in the coffin. So it's the municipal side that is actually more items. But the eco burials, which is completely different, you couldn't even wear, there's some eco burial grounds where I wouldn't even be able to wear some of my shoes because they've been bound together with glue. So it's soiling the soil, that there's that extreme that you'd have to roll up your whatever and barefoot. The natural burial grounds is kind of a compromise in between the two, but its impact on the environment is fantastic, and it means that they won't be built upon. And I think that's one of the things. There's one Riverview, it's called, in Kent, and first time I went there to look before my very first burial, actually, it wasn't just my first natural one, it was my very first burial. And I looked up and I was like, oh my goodness, it's just wow.
Yeah.
I mean, beautiful in the countryside, and it won't be built upon.
Mm.
Seems like this is something that maybe requires more attention, because I've never really thought about burials, how they usually are in coffins and stuff. Never really thought about how much of a problem they could be for the environment. But it doesn't seem like it's something that anyone's really campaigning for change for or anything like that. But it seems like making these kind of what seems like almost simple changes in terms of changing the way people are buried could actually make such a big difference.
It is happening. There are changes being made, and there is a wonderful society called the Natural Death Society, who I am supporting greatly and learning an awful lot from. And it is about education, but it's also one of the things I wanted to do was have people start talking about death and making it a conversation that doesn't have to be doomy and gloomy, and it is the same thing. It's all about education. Once you start to educate people, it's with anything, isn't it? I mean, knowledge is king and all that. But it's not necessarily in this case, but understanding. So you rather than talk at someone and tell them what it is, and if we don't do this, this is going to happen. Quite often, by sowing seeds, literally, and ideas in people's heads, and allowing them to formulate their own opinions, is the best form of education because it sticks. And that's where things like podcasting, live streaming, all sorts of things like this as well can happen, and gaining following. I mean, I have one Twitter account that doesn't have many followers, but my engagement is higher than my one that I've had since 2009. You know, it's getting the people that have got the interest that then share the information for you. Sorry.
I guess that leads nicely on to the book that you mentioned that you're working on. Was it Grief and Me? Is that the right name?
Goodness, Grief and Me.
So that kind of made me think about, maybe we could talk about sort of the stages of grief and what unhealthy and healthy grief looks like. And so I imagine quite a few people, don't really have a base knowledge on how to deal with it, and especially with people who have to deal with sort of sudden deaths, because plenty of those happen. Not everyone gets the chance to sort of process that it's about to happen. So I thought maybe we could talk about your experiences and what you would suggest to people who are trying to grieve, maybe don't know how to.
I think one of the first things is, don't get bogged down with the process of grief. And I know processes do help us, but if you read books on grief, it might stipulate 5 or 7 stages of grief. Great. We can recognize them. You can understand them all. But when you're in that situation, the first thing about grief, in my opinion, and obviously it's only my opinion because it is unique, is whatever you're feeling, go with it. First of all, because that grief is and it creeps up on you at the most unexpected moments. And if you don't allow it to run its course, you're in trouble. So I've grieved about my parents, but not in a tragic way. But I was driving, and my dad, before he died, bought me a number plate that was relevant to my mum. I used to drive a wheelchair car, and people used to take the mickey out of me because we called it the fun bus. And I let people take the mickey, and they had an image that I would drive a certain sort of car.
Yeah.
And then I'd turn up in this Pope-mobile type thing. And I'd turn around to them and I would really make them feel small, because I resented this comment, because it's like, what's it got to do with you? And how else am I going to transport my paralysed mother around? And I used to joke, in a convertible. So my dad bought me a number plate for a new car, and then we put it on a 10-year-old Audi A3 convertible. And he saw it just before he died. And now I do drive around in that little convertible with a cheeky number plate. One day the roof was down and I got to the traffic lights and I just burst into tears. And it's not tears. It's not like, oh, woe is me. It was almost wailing like a banshee type. And I couldn't stop it. So I had to pull over, and I just had to stop 5 minutes. That was all it was. I just completely lost control of the emotions in a way I'd never experienced. And then it took me a good few hours to get over it once I got home. But no book could tell me, let it run. Once I let it run, I actually felt relieved and was able to start thinking, no one's doing it. And now we will be thinking about process 1. This is the denial stage. This is the acceptance stage. They are relevant stages. I'm not dissing all these psychological studies, etc. But my first thing about grief is it's unique. You've got to do, if it's a walk you need, if it's a beer you need, you've got to do it on your terms.
I kind of really, when you mentioned about letting it run its course, it spoke to me a bit, because I have issues with panic attacks quite often, and something I've learned recently is that I need to just let them happen. Like, no matter how long it takes, no matter what it's about or anything, I have to just sit there and let it sort of enter and then exit. If I tried to block it out, or if I tried to ignore it, or try to pass it off as something else, it just gets way worse and comes back in half an hour, and it's way more powerful. So that I definitely agree with that point in terms of letting your emotions be what they are, and if they need to take you somewhere, then go there.
Your body's so powerful. Your body gives you so many answers of things that you need to know that we ignore. And it's this machine that we've got that is the most important machine we will ever work with. And I think when you listen to your body in anything you do in life, it tells you whether you like someone, it tells you whether you're scared, it tells you whether you're falling in love. So much happens in your body, it tells you. And I think, so why would you try and force it not to feel what it really needs to feel? Yeah,
I guess that's where meditation and awareness comes back into it. So you can be more aware of what you're feeling and how to deal with it. Then you're going to be processing these emotions in a much more effective way.
Yeah. Yes, definitely. Emotions, powerful. powerful things. But the book has been really good for me to, when my mum was in palliative care, I sat with her a lot and wrote poems about what I was feeling at that time. Whether anything ever happens with those poems, I don't know. Her eulogy, I wrote poems in it. I wrote some funny ones, some sad ones, included some stuff. And then I wrote one for my dad, and I've been writing a lot since. But in The Goodness Grief, for me, I'm explaining that basically I'm sitting in a room where my mum is about to die. We know that's happening. But it's not doom and gloom. It's about the poem. So I would write I'd have a thought about her, of how she never patronised me as a child, how I was quite an energetic child, lively, go-getter, tomboyish, coming back cuts, covered in mud, the whole lot. She would never say, have a go at me if I messed up. She would just give me a hand, pick me up, and patch me up and send me on my way. She never said, I told you so. So I was thinking about that when I was writing the book. So I captured that in 4 lines in a poem. So all of that from youth, about having the support of your parents and being grateful for that support, instead of it being a whole chapter of 20,000 words, is actually 4 lines. And that sort of moment then sticks, because you've captured an essence. And there'll be so many people that can relate to having parents who are supportive. Not everybody, unfortunately, but, that kind of thing. And so what I've done was I've done the whole, what qualifies me to write this book, that it's from my opinion. I've included a lot of the poetry that I've written for funerals, etc., and adapted some. So some are adaptable for the final piece of artwork, or transforming, like doing an original painting and doing prints and making a few changes. And then there's a section on grief and understanding different stages of it. So looking a bit more clinically, but from a creative point of view. So these stages might not happen. You might have acceptance before denial. Denial doesn't have to necessarily be the first one. And then the final part is I've interviewed some people that have experienced different grief. So from good deaths and bad death, and explaining the difference between a good death and a bad death. And like my mum's death was a good death, my dad's death wasn't, even though they both passed away in this room. So there's different things, the shocking side. A friend of mine, very close friend, her son made a decision with his life a number of years ago. And we were with her all the way through when the transport police arrived. So you can understand, he decided to take his own life with a train. And that was 5 years ago. And she's gone through so much. And I've been with her as a friend on that process, never realising that it was going to get to the books, to this. And 2 weeks ago, she agreed that I could interview her, and I'm including her grief in this, her very dark grief. And so it is covering elderly persons, not tragic, younger persons, tragic. So a few examples, but without being morose on the details. And I think that's what's going to help people, because it will just trigger, it's okay to laugh. Even if it was a tragic death, the person was a buffoon and used to walk into walls all the time. There's still funny things about a person. There's still lovely things about a person. The way they chose to die, if they chose, or the way they died, doesn't define their lives. And it's that's sort of how the journey of the book goes.
That's interesting, because I've always had an issue with the fact that we tend to shy away from telling people how people die. So you maybe go into a group of your friends and you say, this person's died. But then obviously the one question everybody wants to know is, how did they die? And usually the person will just end it there, and no one gets to ask, and it kind of leaves this cliffhanger. And I've always felt that it was, I don't know, I always felt that it was some sort of cowardice towards our own mortality, that we were scared to confront it and talk about it too much. And also just a sort of innate benign politeness that is within our society, which I didn't care much for. But I never really thought about it as being, I guess it's not a defining feature of that person's life, how they died. And it could be a defining feature if you present it wrongly, and you don't want that to be the case. You want their life to be the defining feature.
Indeed. You mentioned a word, mortality, and you said conversation, which I don't know if you're aware that I have launched a podcast called About Mortality and Me.
Yes.
And it is discussing these conversations that people are afraid to have, but having these conversations in the tone we're talking now. So we could be talking about different blends of tea, for example. That's normal. We have one, I don't drink tea, so there you go. We've got differences already, perhaps. But, that the whole dying thing is the one thing, whatever your beliefs are, whatever your motives are in life, whatever you do, that is one thing that we all have in common. And it's not like glorifying it in any way. It's understanding what it's going to happen. And unless, it's like my dad had to sign a piece of paper, and he'd signed it 2 days before he passed away. If he hadn't signed that, I would have been it would have caused me a lot of unnecessary stress afterwards, sorting out finances and things like that. And I had to say to him, I don't deserve to be left in a mess like that. And he knew that, and he did that, and he made sure everything was done. But it was just like, I was scared to have that conversation with him. I'd been putting it off since my mum died. And then it was like, you can't put it off, because if you put it off, some of this stuff, then there's no control over it.
Yeah.
And that's what triggered me starting to have conversations.
Yeah, that like you're saying, that's the same. My mum's going through that same thing at the moment with her mum. That is, she won't sign the piece of paper. She won't engage with that. I don't know if it's people in that generation, but she's predicting that it's going to be difficult financially to go ahead, I guess, without a will and without just a signing of the will and just assuming that everything will be cleared up by somebody. But it's not going to be.
If you don't have the will, that was what I had to get my dad to sign, his will, because it had changed because of mum passing 3 months before. But he, if you don't do it, my brother has, my two elder brothers have a different father. Okay. And their father died 2 weeks after mum's funeral, so they've gone through it. But he didn't leave a will, so one of my brothers had to move up to Scotland to sort it out, and it's just basically it's all going to lawyers.
Yeah,
all going to lawyers, and there's no need for that, and it's horrible. But it's not just that; it's the time and the heartache that you're doing. And I said to my dad, 8.5 years I've been looking after you. It wasn't about the money; it was just about I need your will, because otherwise, getting the pension stopped, doing all this, getting this. So many people ask for these documents and certified copies when you're gone, and I'd started to learn that from mum, and I didn't know. So this whole knowledge pool that I'm now becoming a geek at it's all within the last 12 months of my life that I'm learning all this. But yes, he did sign it, and if he hadn't, I would have ended up in a mess.
But how do you open up that conversation with your parent? I mean, obviously, that's a bit more simple because it seemed to all be very imminent. But for my mum, I think, and her mum, it's not imminent. So you're just saying, look, I know you're going to die. Please sign this. And I don't think she wants to be reminded of that.
No, I think the way I brought it up with my mum when I had to was that I need to make sure that we honour your wishes, and you have 4 children and etc. and what you want to do with certain things. I said, unless you tell me, I won't know. And the only way we can do this is to make it legally binding, etc. And then we all know where we stand. And then there's the power of attorneys, getting a power of attorney done, and that's just in case you need it. But my mum and dad both had their mental faculties until the day they died. Yeah. So I didn't have the dementia side on top or anything like that, which was fortunate for me, being that they were here. It meant I could still have conversations with them. And, the last thing I said to my dad was, night, see you tomorrow. It was normal. Everything was sweet. But I told him the night before that it was okay, he could go. But I'd had to have the conversations with mum way before that. And that's how I broached it, by saying, I need to know your wishes. And then there does become a realisation that, because one of the worst things is if you think all your hard effort is going to go to lawyers and all the things you've worked for is going to go to the government, that's a lot of motivation for people. It's just instilling that kind of sowing that seed of, unless I know what you want, I can't do what you want.
Even though death is something that happens to everyone, it also seems like the one thing that almost everyone avoids or doesn't think about or tries to ignore. Or like, we've got a couple of pet rats, and we were talking, they're like kind of, their lifespan is quite short. And we were talking the other day about it, but it got maybe like less than a year left, but it was just, I don't want to talk about it. I don't want to think about it. And it's just like, obviously it comes from a place of sort of fear and not wanting it to happen. But it does seem like if you accept that it's going to happen, like if you accept your own mortality, then it's going to help you to live your life in a probably, most likely in a more fulfilled way, because you're going to accept that your time is limited, your time is potentially quite short, and you should be I mean, it's quite a common thing these days, but you should be making the most of the time that you do have. So to accept that death is a real thing, and maybe not even for yourself, like to accept that your parents are going to die, that's going to make you want to spend more time with your parents, if you get on with them. So like, I feel like accepting that it is going to happen is a much more efficient way of living.
I think you're right. If you can accept the now and understand things, it does make a difference on your life. Like, I'm a lot older than you guys, but I have diluted and felled, as it were, some of my friendships and relationships that I've had. And lockdown's been brilliant, actually. I've loved it because it's really given me a chance to personally reset. So I'm one of those that's coming out of lockdown, not learning a new language. I don't mean learning a new skill. I don't mean any of that stuff. My house is still a mess, none of that. But personally, I've had a chance to redevelop and stuff and reset myself. And it does, when you realise what's important to you, one of the things for me was to have time. So everything that I do is on my time. I choose when I work. I choose if I accept a service. I choose what date we do the funerals. I choose what date we might do drinks festivals, food and drink festivals, and stuff, all different things. I choose when I work. And if I decide that I don't want to do anything that week, apart from write, I can do that. And I think that for me was one of my life goals was to be time rich. It was about the time. It's never been about the money.
Yeah. Recently, someone who's also into Stoic philosophy was quoting something to me that I have sort of thought about a lot since, which is that nothing in life belongs to you, and that you should be happy that you got to experience it when you did, and not sad that it left. But you don't own anything. You don't get to be sad when something passes on because it was never yours. You just have to be happy that you got to experience it for the time you did. And I've really thought about that a lot recently.
It's experiencing. It's like my other half is coming up to 50. And it's like, what are we going to do? And it's like, well, do we do a big party? We can't. We don't know, because obviously lockdown and gatherings and all stuff like that. And we were talking last night, and we're saying that it's about the time. So we sat there and went, who do we want to spend time with? Yeah. We can do lots of little things if we want to, but who do we actually want to spend time with? And that's the most precious thing we have for ourselves, and also to give to somebody else. And that is true. And that's not me just speaking from an idealistic place. I really truly believe that, and it does make a difference on where my energy gets focused.
I think it's easy to sort of fall into the trap of thinking that you need to do what everyone else does, in terms of for example, I'm only 24. For my last birthday, I don't drink or anything now, but in your early 20s, you'd expect a big party or go out clubbing and things like that. But we just sat at home and played a couple of board games. And I enjoyed that way more, because it was just, my close friends, and we just had a nice night. So I feel like maybe people do sort of fall into the trap of thinking that they need to do things because that's what all their friends do, but it's not actually what they enjoy.
Exactly. We just said the three of us go away in the camper van, the dog. Yeah. That would be quite nice. So we joked, said, let's go back. So it's the three of us going away to a field, solar panels, still able to do stuff, gas camping things, you don't, the needs, your basic needs are actually, if you strip it down, are really quite minimal. Okay, I'm a gadget queen. I've got the AirPods, I've got the phone, I've got the computers. I am a gadget queen. But as for everything else, I'm not actually as materialistic as I once believed I was.
Yeah, I think when
I worked in the city, I believed I was. And I'll be honest with you, I don't have any of those people I worked in the city with in my social circle. I haven't stayed in touch with anyone. Right. That explains a lot. I understand a lot because of that.
Well, yeah, I mean, how long did you work in banking for? Quite a long time.
Until, let me think, so probably about 10 years.
Right, yeah. So, I mean, I'd imagine over that time span, it'd be easy to go pretty deep into that lifestyle. And I imagine it's probably quite difficult to get out of it and cut it all out. But I'm sure once you were out of it and you realised, who you really were, which now looking at it, seems like you're quite a different person to someone who works in banking. I'm sure that was quite a big relief. And and having that understanding of yourself, I'm sure, is something that everyone should strive for.
I'll be honest with you, at school, at university, at banking, in the banking world, in the IT world of Hewlett Packard. Fortunately, I was living in Holland then, so that was quite an interesting experience. But I never truly felt I fitted in. And it took me to probably my mid-30s to start to really understand why. And I was never the person that wanted to go to grammar school. I liked university, don't get me wrong, I don't mean that, but to do that and then get a mortgage and then do this and then have 2.4 children. But that's what everyone was doing, and that was all I was exposed to. So I suppose from quite an early age, I was battling in my head, not horribly, it wasn't a horrible battle, but this isn't right. So what's this agitation in me? What's this? And then when you start to realise what it is, that's cool, because I'm not that conventional. You know, yes, I have a little blonde bob. I'm wearing glasses. I have my mum's wedding ring trapped on my finger. Snow snacking. I'm not that kind of person that on the outside, I'm the same person as I was when I was a teenager. Now I just understand it, that I wasn't like my peers. And it was then you then gravitate towards people who have the same philosophies as you and the same beliefs. They don't necessarily have the same beliefs politically, but you can discuss. You can actually have discussions with people. They're not just talking at you their opinion. I'm Brexit, I'm a Labour, we can't be friends. You know, there's gravitating towards people who have the same sort of awareness and ethos, I suppose, about respect for every individual.
Mm-hmm.
What is it you say? Is it people are sinks and someone's a drain?
Oh,
or
me.
something like that? Like the people that you have around you, like choosing your friend group is like a massive deal. I think it's a way bigger deal than people think it to be.
Yeah, people are either sinks. People either radiators or drains, and go to the side. But I don't necessarily want to judge people too much on that. But sometimes when you're living with somebody who is draining your energy, it can be pretty damaging, and that's in various different ways. You can try and help that person, but sometimes you can't help them, and you just have to move away for your own safety.
No, I agree, and that is part of life's lessons and the deeper, meaningful stuff. But it's satisfying when you know your own mind and you're not trying to emulate yourself onto somebody else, or you're not trying to fit in where you don't. It's like the whole round hole square peg thing, isn't it? You know, it's never going to work, no matter how much you bash it. But I do appreciate people as individuals. I understand there's a lot of difference. I like you, I don't really want to judge people, but I know quite quickly whether I'm going to I have this role for work, for the awards and stuff, if I'm going to help people, when I've been mentoring people as well previously. Would I have a coffee with them? Would I have a glass of wine with them, as in my evening free time? Would I go out for dinner with them, as in longer time? Would I invite them to my home? Mm-hmm. And so when you think like that, it's very simple, but it is true, because I'm not going to invest a lot of my time in you if I wouldn't embrace you in my own home. Then our relationship isn't going to be that. You know, it's kind of an automatic filtering process that I've maybe defined too specifically there. But I go on gut instinct a lot. And I think as a youngster, I ignored the gut instinct, and that's where I ended up a little bit off the rails for my own development. But that's what makes you, isn't it? The mistakes, and I do it once, it's a mistake. Do it twice, and you're stupid. You know, if you keep doing the same thing.
I mean, it seems like maybe you had to do what you did in terms of going into banking and doing these things you weren't sure of in order to get to where you are today.
Yeah, I think so.
There's a whole philosophy of everything's supposed to happen. Like everything happens for a reason. So maybe that's just what it was. You know, you had to do that to get to where you are.
It's nice to be at this age, I suppose, and I do genuinely feel happy inside. And it's not a forced happiness, and it's not a facade. And I'm very lucky to have what I have. You know, I have worked hard to get to this point, so it's not been handed to me on a silver platter or anything. But it is a satisfying position to be in, because then you're happy and you can go and share some of that happiness, which sounds really woo-wooey in a way, but you can actually, if you're happy and you walk into someone's life who's sad, like in the funeral world, your happiness generally, if they feed off it, people will take a little bit. So I don't mind them draining me a little bit, but I understand what you mean about friends and stuff. I've had the drains, a lot. And now the friends I have, I'm so lucky. We just have laughter, so much laughter in my social circle, which is just lovely. And I think having lost a lot of the, probably a lot of my own attitude, actually, chips on my shoulder from, I used to joke that I would write a book one day called Elbows and Attitude.
I think maybe the age thing is a big thing as well, because I'm 25 and a lot of my friends, well, all of my friends are in their 20s. A lot of us have just come out of university, and people are going between being radiators and being drains as they they meet their own tasks and as they kind of work out who they are. And you can see people build up this inner tension where they don't know who they are. And then they become so irritating in your life and you don't know what to do. And maybe they're a close friend that you can't out, and maybe you don't want to because you really like them. But I've seen a lot of those people also, and I probably was one of them as well, sort of just reach this point and then suddenly it's just like big breath in, big breath out. And they're just kind of, oh yeah, they're so much nicer to be around now, so much more positive. And you say you bring your like positive attitude. I'd say maybe not necessarily, it's not just the positive attitude, but you have the way that you talk, you kind of bring this calm ability to empathize. Like people probably feel comfortable crying in front of you and with you, not because they feel like you're going to cheer them up, but because they feel like that you're at one, you can dip into these emotions. You're not going to feel awkward crying in front of somebody like somebody, all stuck up inside themselves emotionally might do.
That's a good way of looking. That's a really good way of describing it. It's emotions. I think when people understand their emotions, whatever they are, when you can start to understand them, and like we said earlier, let whatever emotions run with it. Like I'm a nightmare at times. I have high energy levels. It's like I've done 10 cans of Red Bull, and it's just like, let's play. What can we do? What can we do? Oh, goodness sakes, like, calm down, But it is that energy. But then I have to know, when I'm in that kind of, I have to like go for a walk with the dog or, do something. And it's just understanding, it is understanding where you're at. But that's quite funny, actually. I'm 48, so you two guys are nearly like, the two of you are nearly my age. Wow, I suddenly feel very old. But you're a lot wiser than I was at 25. I was a bit of a knob at 25.
It's easy to come across as wise when you're hosting your own podcast.
Excellent.
Something I did want to talk about, actually, when you mentioned you'd done stand-up comedy, and I wanted to go more into that because the last couple of years I've gotten really into comedy and comedians and watching comedy, so I'd like to hear more about that story.
I did it as a challenge, and it was a challenge, and I wasn't very funny, so I decided to do funerals. No, I did it, and then I'm married to a lovely lady called Sue, and Sue developed breast cancer, and then I couldn't do comedy. I couldn't write it. It wasn't right when we were going through the operation and stuff. It just wasn't the way it was going. So I enjoyed it. It's the most scary thing I've ever done, to actually put yourself on a stage and go, I'm a stand-up comedian. It's very different to being on a stage hosting awards where I am funny. And I am funny. I know that. People tell me I laugh. I have 340 people laughing, that kind of thing. But it was the most scariest thing I've ever done. But it did teach me. It did not bring me down a peg or two. That's a bit unfair to me. It did teach me a different respect for the stage.
Yeah, I've done it. I've done it once as well. And especially because I'm a musician and performer, you're completely at the whim of the audience. You can go from being a great comedian to being an absolutely awful comedian that everyone hates in a split second.
Yeah,
say the wrong thing or deliver it wrong. It's unbelievable.
Oh gosh, I did 3 gigs, and the second one I did the whole act in a poem that I'd written, a funny poem.
Right.
I don't just write sad poems. And Sue was looking over the balcony and she was videoing it, recording it, and I got lost in the poem.
Okay.
Well, God, what am I going to do? So I made up a poem in the poem until I could get back to the poem. And afterwards she went, how on earth did you do that? And I went, I've got no idea, absolutely no idea. That was scary. That's probably the biggest fear I've ever felt, apart from for spiders.
Fear.
You have the like wash of like the cold wash come over you as you realise that you've braved this. But I mean, it's such a funny thing because I don't know, how big was the audience?
Oh, probably that one was probably only about 150, 200, 150.
That's a big audience. When I did it, I had about 30 people there.
Oh,
They
yeah.
get up and do comedy themselves.
Yeah, I probably would still do it again. I would give it another go.
Yeah, I
I
would.
probably would.
Yeah,
I've got quite a lot of funny stories now about funerals. I could use that and caring for old people and bodily functions and stuff. You know, I've got a whole different set I can use now.
You seem to do quite a lot of poetry. Is that something that you've always sort of been interested in? Yeah.
Since I was a kid, I've written stories, poems, journals, always been anal about my pens and which pad I can write with and what paper I use. And if a pad's dogged, I give it away to someone else. I can't use it if it's got soiled pages and stuff. Someone else can have it.
Oh,
so
yeah.
my rough book looks like somebody's neatest handwriting book, you know.
There's nothing wrong with that. You're putting passion
Yeah, I do. I love
into
it.
your work, aren't you?
I do love it.
I write poems. I like to write them, but I really have to force myself to do it. And, well, not force myself, but I have to get it's not something that I just do naturally. It's something that I have to sit down and do. And I do really enjoy it and I get a lot out of it, especially because I write lyrics as well, but that's a different sort of thing. The lyrics come as part of the music, but the poems come as like, okay, here's something I would like to do, and I have to read other poems and come at it at a more sort of technical viewpoint. How would I want to structure this, and what do I want it to actually be about, rather than being some sort of free-form art that comes naturally to me.
I do I'm teaching myself keyboard, and that's a bit more structured process for me, whereas the writing is just literally pick up the pen and see what happens.
Yeah. But I don't necessarily think it's a bad thing. It's nice to have the two. The music, I'm just sitting here and I pick up, this is my music room, as you might be able to see there's drums behind us. Just pick up the guitar, play, and then see what happens, plug it in, record, go, blah, blah, blah. Yeah, but with the poems, it's got to sort of like mull around in my mind for a little bit, and then I'll sit down and be like, this is what I want to do. I want it to kind of structure like this and whatever.
No, it's art form, isn't it? You know, for music, there has to be some specifics, but can start on free flow. And like you said, then technically you'd have to go back and adapt it. But I have to say, for the poems I put in the book,
yes,
they aren't really readapted, and there's quite a lot I've explained that I'm putting this in its raw form because this is unedited, because then it captures the moment properly. So they're not works of art; they are expressions, which is quite nice. But then there are others that if I was going to do, I would tidy up probably, but not a lot, because I think if I tidied them up too much, it takes away from why they were created. Perhaps.
I wonder if you could give me some advice. I've never done any like sort of writing before, and I was never like very good at English in high school or anything. But I've recently, in the last year, come up with some story ideas that I really like, and I write out a synopsis sort of thing. But then I start to write the first paragraph, and then I can't do it.
So what stops you?
I'm not sure. I just don't know. I think because I have zero experience with writing, I just don't know where to start, how to fill out a story, or how to should I start by doing an overall of the beginning, middle, and end, or do I just write and see where it goes? I'm lost on where to go forward from the start.
Don't overthink it. I think to start is just to write. Even if you start writing maybe like meditation, 5-10 minutes a day, write something. You get into that habit of just opening your mind to let it flow. You'll write a load of rubbish, but there might be in there a nugget. And then as you get better, then you start to stop yourself wandering. But sometimes it's good just to put things down on paper. I mean, I write stuff and then I chuck it away. I don't keep absolutely everything because some of it is so naff, but it's just to get my brain thinking that way. But I think not overthink and just start.
Well, yeah, that makes sense actually, because I manage bands for a living, so I'm quite rigid and structured, and everything's boom, boom, boom. So I do think a lot about what I do. So maybe I'm just like you say, overthinking it and blocking myself.
It's quite nice to unblock yourself, though, if you're very structured in one way and then, creative in the other, because I always describe myself now as half geek, half creative.
Right.
And that's where school misunderstood me, because I was at a grammar school and you either had to be academic or academic. I wanted to be arts. I wanted to be the drama. I wanted to not be the drama. I wanted to do drama and stuff. And I think that's where I was misunderstood from a very early age and misguided perhaps in the options I took, etc. But yeah, half geek, half creative. And it's the creativity that means I can concentrate on being a geek when I need to, and vice versa, that I don't want to be a geek. It's not like being schizophrenic, I guess, but it's not. But being able to do both things, both sides, and being able to then ignite which side you want to use.
Yeah, that seems like a pretty good situation to be in.
It's quite cool, actually. I like the sound of that. I'm getting to like me talking to you boys.
I'm glad.
So when's the book coming out?
Don't know yet. It's literally only just the first draft has been finished. I have someone in the wings ready to help me.
Right.
I need to. I've stepped away from it for a week or so, and then I shall go back to it and literally go through it. But I'm basically going to print it all out, which is, I apologise to the environment, and then I'm going to go away in the camper van, and I'm going to sit there and go through it, and then just make notes on what I want to change and do I want to change anything. Because when I've looked at it before in my own environment, I love going out of environment to work.
Mm-hmm.
I find different environments instill different things or ignite different things. But when I've tried to look at what I need to change or adapt, I haven't found much at the moment. And I think that's too arrogant. It can't be that correct yet. That's the naivety of I've never written a book before. So then after that, I've got 5 or 6 people lined up to read the first draft.
Okay.
And they're people whose opinions I trust, and they won't be like, oh, Hilary, it's really good. It's really made me think. They will be honest. I don't want the fluffies.
Yeah.
The fluffies can have copies when it's published, I want people that I trust and I respect their opinions, because I'm not a princess about that, and I'm not afraid of the criticism of it now. 10 years ago might have been a different story, but now it's what I need to get that real feedback. So I'm open to it.
Nice. And where can people find you?
Gosh, hidden. I'm hidden. No, I'm all over the place, actually, because I have different guises. But guises, Instagram, I love Instagram.
Yeah.
And I'm Hilary J. Steel on Instagram. And I'm fascinated by Instagram. I'm probably an older person on Instagram. No, not the oldest, but, I do enjoy that. And Twitter, I'm Hilary J. Steel, or Kent Funerals is me as well.
We've covered a lot of topics in terms of things that could be quite morbid, but also things that are, educational.
The tone's not being morbid at all, which is part of the point, that you can talk about sensitive issues without becoming bogged down with emotion.